First things first, on behalf of Syracuse University, we would like to acknowledge, hello, test. That's good? Okay. I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse now stands. Going off that note, good evening, everyone. Again, thanks for attending tonight's debate. Before jumping into everything, we would first like to address the elephant in the room, and obviously not the Republicans.
For those of you who really hated that joke, don't hate Andres. I was the one who wrote it and insisted that it was in there. So we are, of course, referring to the events of last November. And while things may seem to have calmed down over winter break, the tension between a large portion of students and the administration very much remains.
College Democrats and college Republicans believe that everyone deserves an education and that nobody deserves to experience a level of bigotry when trying to succeed in life. Racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia have no place in either organizations. With that said, we look forward to a meaningful discussion between both organizations in regards to an important topic that affects everyone in the nation.
Everyone in the audience will hear things that they will disagree with tonight, as is to be expected in any substantive debate. Don't snap, don't jeer, don't boo. There will be 35 minutes of Q&A at the end of the debate for you to voice your concerns to one side, the other, or both. Decorum, civility, and maturity seem vanishingly rare in these trying times, and whether or not that's true in this room tonight is your decision.
We would like to thank Professor Ria right here, Sunju Raybeck, Kelly Coleman, and everyone who is here to help make this event possible of Maxwell. Without any of these people and all of you, this debate could not happen. So once again, thank you for coming tonight. We look forward to a great discussion. And without further ado, let's get the debate over. Let's go over here.
That's the way I'd like our department meetings to start every time. Let's go, Rear. All right. I want to congratulate, first of all, Andres and Rhodey, and also the rest of the college Democrats and Republicans for organizing and preparing for this debate. It took them a lot of work. And this is the third of these debates in 3 years, and I am now really quite optimistic that they have become institutionalized at this point, and they're going to continue. And these kinds of debates are the first of their kind that I can remember in my 28 years at the university. So I just want to take a minute to thank them and to acknowledge them. And to underline a couple of the things that the two of them just said, it's also particularly gratifying for me to have been able to watch something like this come together and to see Andres and Brody cooperate and work together and work hard together on this when the political adversaries beyond the campus are having a hard time these days constructively engaging with each other. So again, double congratulations to the two organizations. And I also want to underline what both of them have said already regarding civility. Although the snapping kind of reminds me of 50s jazz, so maybe that's okay, I don't know. But more generally, I just want to say my piece on this, that the university is just beginning the healing process, and it's going to take a long time. And so please bear that in mind when you're thinking about your comments and your questions. And I too want to thank Kelly Coleman, Sarah Forland, Zane Aga, his friend Kenneth Wilson, all these folks in the Campbell Institute for helping in various ways to make the event happen. Now, I do have the high privilege and distinct honor of moderating this debate. And my role is to keep things moving along and also keep things on point. I'll do my best to do that. I'm also tasked with possibly interjecting questions, especially in the first two sections of the debate. You've all gotten, I hope, the cards that we had available on your way in to just give you a basic overview of what we're going to be doing and the order in which we're going to be doing it. There is one big issue before this chamber tonight. It is immigration, and it is broken into 3 sections. The first, family separation. The second, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. And then the third, the Policy Solutions, which will include more of an overview of the issue. And again, you have the individual debaters on the cards that we handed out. They will, I believe, roughly speak in the order that appears on those cards, but they can reintroduce themselves to you if that's not the case. I'll introduce the debaters when we get to each particular issue. Now, the rules that have been agreed to by each of the two organizations are a little complicated. They're not Iowa complicated, I hope, but they are a little complicated. So let me explain them briefly. For the first two sections, family separation and ICE, each of which will last approximately 20 minutes, there will be one 3-minute opening statement per team, and then there will be a free-floating rebuttal period for about 14 minutes in which I might or might not interject questions depending on what questions they have of each other and what points they want to make back and forth. And then in the Policy Solutions and Overview section, and we are allotting more time for this, 35 minutes, there will be one 5-minute opening statement per team, and then 4 alternating periods of rebuttals from each team, a little more formal on the rebuttals there in the last section. And again, I may or may not interject questions. And then that will leave time for 2 6-minute concluding statements. At that point, certainly last but not certainly least, there will be 35 minutes or so of where you get to get involved, the audience questions. And if possible, if you have a question, direct it to one team if you can, rather than the general group. And then they can stand up and respond to those. We'll have 2 mic runners for that, so please raise your hand and I'll try to call on 2 people at a time at that time point. And then afterward, I just want to remind everyone that there will be, and where's Kelly here? I'll double check, I'm not getting this wrong. Okay, I'm going to say this. If not, you can come and get after me later. But there will be a reception at the end outside with food and non-alcoholic drink, and we can continue the conversation we start here. There. Sorry about that. Chancellor might be watching. Can I see? All right. So the first topic. Let's bring the debaters up for the first topic in the immigration debate, which is family separation. We'll have a coin flip to see who wants to go first. And the debaters on the Democratic side are Ty Gugerty. Here's Ty. And Rhiannon Cobbett. And then Christian Padilla. Did I say that right? Okay. And then Skylar Swipe. We'll let you call the coin flip, and then if whoever wins can decide whether they want to go first or second. It's a 50% proposition. You really can't make a bad decision. It's tails. Would you like to go first or second? They should go first. Let them go first. All right.
We go up here? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Ty Gugerty. I'll be debating for the Democrats today.
And I'm Rhiannon, so I'll be doing the same.
Okay. So, family separation has been one of the most controversial issues facing this administration, and for good reason. The detainment and separation of families not only includes those who are crossing legally, but those who are legally seeking asylum in the United States. The treatment of migrant children fails to meet the standards set by the Flores settlement and also fails to meet the standards of Customs and Border Protection's own policies. In detainment facilities, conditions are so crowded that migrant children cannot sleep, they lack proper nutrition, have limited access to clean water and clean clothes, and basic hygiene. Furthermore, there's been multiple accounts and cases of sexual assault and poor medical treatment and deaths.
These families are being detained beyond an initial stay just for the mere misdemeanor and offense of crossing the border. They are separated from their children over misdemeanors, felonies, or disease concerns. This is unethical, as it's a higher burden on these families than we extend to our own children. Taxpayer money is being wasted on the unnecessary detainment and separation. Additionally, we must acknowledge our own government's responsibility in enabling and creating situations in Latin and South America that have led to the migration crisis we see today, such as the shock doctrine policies implemented in South America and the defending of the reduction of policies that were essential to mitigate the societal pressures that lead to mass migration. Family separation must be reserved for cases of abuse or neglect. We must reunite separated children with their parents and allow case-by-case evaluation before these children are forcibly separated from their families by a justice. And finally, we must return children with their parents upon their parents' deportations, not months later. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Good evening. The left and a good portion of the media have painted the Republican Party as an institution that is anti-immigrant, heartless, and cruel. But this simply isn't true. As the son of an immigrant myself, I can plainly see that the Republican Party is an institution that fully supports legal and lawful immigration. Democrat leaders have exploited Americans' good nature and morals to make Republicans out to be the bad guy. I think it is worth saying at the outset that we are not here to voice support for the separation of families. In this country, laws are meant to be upheld and obeyed. That's why my family decided to move here. It is important for potentially immoral laws to be updated, turning them into moral and rational laws by our legislators. It is the responsibility of Congress to make laws in this country, not the courts and not the president. We don't support separating families, but we are the party of the rule of law, and under the current law, this is what happens. Republicans are the ones that have made the effort to change and renovate these laws to create a more effective and efficient immigration system that have time and again been shut down by the left. Thank you.
There is no specific written policy in place that demands children be separated from their families. This has unfortunately happened as a natural consequence of federal justice regulations combined with two major court decisions, Flores v. Reno in 1997 and Flores v. Lynch in 2016. Both cases enforced the ruling that minors cannot be held longer than 20 days. In April of 2018, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a zero-tolerance policy in which illegal border crossing now is treated as both a civil and criminal offense. This policy enforced the rulings that were already in place and made these problems more obvious to the public. President Trump then passed an executive order on June 20th of 2018, reversing his zero-tolerance policy. President Trump also attempted to modify the Flores v. Reno settlement so that minors would not have to be transferred to different facilities from their parents, but this was shut down by the courts. Federal justice regulations make clear that children cannot be held more than 20 days, and children cannot be held in adult detention facilities, hence causing the problems surrounding family separation.
All right. Does either side want to challenge anything that they've heard from the other side? Oh, yes? Yes, go ahead and stand and get your microphone.
That way, no, we don't.
There's a microphone right there. You just stand.
I'd just like to clarify that the reason why family separation is currently part of the necessary policy is because of President Trump's zero tolerance policy that he instituted. It was not a policy that was already put forth by Democrats. And the reason why it requires separation is because under that policy, the crossing becomes, the consequence to cross means that those parents are immediately put in federal prison. So yes, you cannot put children in federal prison. But the question would be, should you put parents in federal prison for the misdemeanor of illegally crossing?
So, like,
Why don't we, that's one question that's been put out there. Do you want to respond to that? Either of you.
Let's try to figure out the mic.
Is this on? Okay.
First, I'd like to clarify that President Trump did pass the zero tolerance policy, but within 2 months, he also went back on that policy and tried to fix all of the problems that it caused. I'd also like to clarify that for any other crime, robbery, any other crime, you're going to be held in prison. So these parents who know that they're intentionally illegally crossing should be held to the same standard as any other crime in the United States.
as this is a misdemeanor, some equivalent misdemeanor, kind of zany example of a misdemeanor in a state is carrying ice cream in your back left pocket. Furthermore, other more common example is shooting off fireworks. So and when I shoot off fireworks on 4th of July, I've never been sent to federal prison. So I think that a misdemeanor doesn't warrant necessarily the level of detention that is being given.
Just to be clear, the zero tolerance policy was simply an amplification that Trump put forward. There was already illegal immigration laws, so he didn't instrument this all by himself. It was something there. It was something merely to enforce a law that was already there. Not only that, this is a criminal offense. So, you know, you're relating this to something that's not even the same scope. It's a matter of national security, not a matter of not letting people into the country.
The previous examples would be a criminal misdemeanor, so that would be a criminal infraction. And further, the Department of Justice was very excited to announce upon the implementation of this policy that it was a new policy. So this is not, at least according to the United States Department of Justice, when it was put out, this was not put out as, oh, this is an amplification of existing laws. It was put out as a new and exciting policy that Trump was putting forward.
So let me throw in two questions here, or maybe three. One thing I'm just not entirely clear on listening to both of you. Do the four of you agree on what currently is happening?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay, all right. So let me ask a question then for the Republicans, and then I have a question for the Democrats that sort of push on what I've already heard. For the Republicans, there are thousands, literally, of examples of the exertion of discretion when it comes to the enforcement of different laws. I think that's what you were getting at with your fireworks example. So you, if I heard your team correctly, are not in favor of separating families. All right. So why would you not be more in favor of exercising that discretion that clearly exists in many other areas of the law in order to avoid it?
The problem with this part of the law is that you only have two options. Because children can only be held for 20 days, you either have the option of A, holding the children for 20 days and then releasing their whole entire family with them, or B, holding the children 20 days, releasing the children, and then keeping the families in detention facilities. So unless you want to completely release every single family that comes into the United States, it's a very hard issue to have like different opinions on a case-by-case basis because of the fact that you can only hold the child 20 days, but you don't want to completely release the family every single time.
Do you folks want to respond to that? The Democrats want to respond to
I'd just like to respond and clarify that while policy may state that a child can only be held for 20 days, there are cases after the zero tolerance policy ended of children being kept for months. In fact, there was a case of a girl who was kept 5 months after her father was deported in the state of New York. Her father was her only family. She's from Honduras. And she was kept here 5 months, not 20 days, 5 months after his case had already been decided and he had been sent back to Honduras. So I'd like to clarify that while policy may state 20 days, the reality is not that.
So you're making the argument that, so you're not really refuting what the law is, and that's not what we're doing. We agree with you completely. It should be 20 days. So what you're arguing is the system should be made better, and we completely agree with that. So how would you go about doing that? Well, it's what we're trying to do. We're trying to fund these institutions, these agencies, these facilities to make sure that they're properly taken care of, that the people are trained properly, and that people are secure, that they get the proper living conditions that, as you mentioned earlier, that they're clearly not getting. So would the solution not be to fund these agencies and institutions for immigration systems better?
My concern is that under the current practice of these agencies, it's very secretive. It's difficult for the American public to hold them accountable. And so with our inability to hold these agencies accountable, I don't see how we can put our full trust in an agency that isn't able to meet the standards of its own requirements. They're not meeting their own standards. The protocols that Border Patrol currently has in place are not being met. So how am I supposed to, as an American citizen, trust in them by putting more money into them when they're currently not able to meet basic human requirements?
Can you give us a solution then?
The solution that I would give is, number one, we don't need to detain even close to as many of the migrants as we currently are. Asylum seekers, over 98.5% of them make their court appearances upon being released. We are detaining asylum seekers that do not need to be detained. And that's, if you want to source, that's Syracuse University's own track system, which is a really cool system, by the way.
So let me go ahead. I got a question for the Democrats, but you go ahead. That's all right. It's good. Go ahead.
So, I mean, we're still not disagreeing. I think we're still on the point that you just don't want all illegal immigrants to be detained. Is that right? I just want to clarify.
I'm not arguing that there should be no vetting process or detainment. What I'm saying is the current level of detainment that we are seeing is unnecessary. It's costing us unnecessarily. And so we can roll back the people and the number of people that we are detaining. And I think doing that would potentially allow for the funds to go in better places before we start increasing funds to these agencies.
So let me ask a follow-up question then that gets it right at what you're saying then. So the Democrats' position is then no family separation whatsoever, or having it done in a different way that you're sort of setting forward the areas that would fall outside of where you would think it would be acceptable to have families separate.
Right.
Which one?
So definitely not a complete zero family separation. Obviously, there are going to be cases of abuse and neglect, just like we have for our own citizens. We separate families in the United States all the time because they are not meeting the standards for treatment that we require out of parents. So when a parent is unable to meet those standards of treatment, then yes, I would encourage family separation in those instances.
Okay, but not as part of the enforcement of a border then. That's beginning to sound more like a social welfare kind of decision that's made by the state. Is that what you're, is that where you are?
Yeah, so, like, for example, like asylum seeking should be processed in a quicker way. And that should, for especially asylum seekers, they shouldn't have to be separated from family members. And it's like she was saying, it's more for people who there is signs of abuse and they are deemed in contempt of the law for other reasons, like more egregious misdemeanors and crimes than just like violent felonies and other acts that don't rise to the level of just simply crossing the border.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that later in the debate, we'll get to this point with the Democrats, that you will set forward your vision for border security as you think it ought to be done. But in this particular instance, is there a concern on your part that doing what you suggest might change some of the incentives for people thinking about trying to get into the United States illegally, and in particular, if they know that there's going to be an emphasis on not separating families, that might encourage them actually to bring children into dangerous situations in order to get here? How do you navigate that one?
So I think using family separation as a punitive measure in order to discourage adults from crossing is abhorrent, because that is punishing the child, inflicting long-lasting psychological damage on the child for the mere purpose of trying to dissuade adults from making an adult decision. The fact is that this is not only affecting adults, and it's not just affecting the parents, it is affecting the children in these situations who are spending months away from anyone that they know by themselves. So no, I don't think that it's acceptable to use family separation as a punitive measure.
You folks want to?
No, I agree. I don't think it should be a punitive measure, but I mean, as we've been describing, it's 20 days that they're supposed to be locked or in facilities, and in that case, after they're kept there, they're supposed to be released to somebody who's the closest living relative, and if not, then licensed programs to take custody of these children, which of course, it's an implication. Family separations in the American system happens every day when a criminal offense occurs. It happens every day. Someone commits a crime and they go to prison and they're separated from their child. Do we send their child to prison with them? No. In this case, they're being sent back where they came from.
I think your partner wants to jump in if she needs a microphone.
I'd also like to clarify that we're not saying that this should be used as a deterrent. We're saying our whole argument is basically that it's an unfair consequence of the law that is currently in place. So I don't think he's asking if it should be used as a deterrent. Rather, he's saying if it comes about that families aren't being separated, which under the current law isn't feasible in the first place, but if families aren't being separated anymore, then will there be consequences? Will people come in with children that aren't theirs trying to come across the border? Will criminals come in with children just so they can get across without being vetted? I think that's more the question that we're trying to answer. I don't think we agree that this should be used as punishment.
And I think we have a couple minutes left. Is that right? So, okay. Any final thoughts before we leave this topic and move on to ICE? Either team. It sounds like there's some overlap here. Yeah. There's overlap here. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you. We just fell based on the last year. All right. So, yes. So now we have our ICE debaters. Okay, so we have for the Democrats. Is this going to stay the Democrat side? Okay, that's okay. All right.
Do you want us to?
No, that's good. That's fine. It's on the left. I guess that makes sense. Are the Republicans here? Is that them? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Okay, it's on. It's on.
It's on? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. All right, for the ICE debate. For the Democrats, we have Lindsay Kobe. And Bina Stewing. Did I get your last name right? Did I get your last name right? Yes. Okay, great. All right. And for the Republicans, we have Sebastian Burns. And Adriana San Marco. All right, now, we started last time, I believe, with the Democrats. That's right, the Republicans won the coin toss, so if we're alternating now, we will start with the Republicans here with their introductory 3-minute statement. Thanks.
We must fix our broken immigration system. This means stopping illegal immigration. However, it also means welcoming properly vetted legal immigrants, regardless of their race or religion. Sebastian and I stand in support of former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley when she makes this statement. We argue for a reformation and expansion of the U.S. Immigration's custom enforcement to ensure security and safety for the citizens of the United States. On the basis of reforms, we believe that it is necessary to revert to the Morton Memo approach, which outlines that the priority of ICE is first, to detain those who pose a threat to national security. The second priority is for those who are recent illegal immigrants, and the third, those who did not heed a previous order of removal. Further, we find that it is essential to address the recent problems with ICE agents. Thus, we call for stricter vetting and training procedures. ICE outlines their mission as being to protect America from cross-border crime and illegal immigration that threaten national security and public safety, which is exactly what we have seen since the agency's development in 2003. First, look towards the Joint Terrorist Task Force. ICE implemented a Joint Terrorist Task Force with the FBI, and in doing so has bolstered safety within the U.S. Realize that this task force has led to over 1,100 criminal investigations relating to terrorism and to the arrest of over 500 illegal immigrants that sought to do harm to our country and our citizens. ICE finds that these efforts significantly contributed to preventing national security threats against the United States. Next, we can look towards in the enforcement and removal operations. Homeland Security finds that in 2017 alone, the ERO was responsible for the criminal convictions and criminal charges of 48,000 assault offenses, 11,000 weapon offenses, and 1,800 homicide offenses. Lastly, we can analyze another statistic from the Division of ICE, Homeland Security Investigations. Within the first year of HSI's conception, criminal arrest rates rose by 30%, seizures of illicit drugs by more than 40%, intellectual property rights seizures by 128%, and weapons and ammunition seizures by 762%. Every statistic that Sebastian and I have shown leads to the same conclusion. ICE stops crime. They stop criminals. They protect our country, our values, and our people. We understand the current issues that plague this agency, but we advocate for solvency rather than complete demolition. Thank you.
Hello and good evening. It is such an honor to be here, and thank you everyone for coming. Created in 2003 in response to the 9/11 terrorist attack, Immigration and Customs Enforcement was meant to protect Americans against future acts of terrorism. Under Donald Trump, ICE has gone way beyond the intended scope of their power to implement policies that cause severe harm to innocent people simply seeking security or opportunity for themselves and their families. The GOP has politicized undocumented immigration to stoke hatred and fear and gain political power. Undocumented immigrants pose no inherent threat to our safety or well-being, yet this topic has become the foundation of the entire GOP platform. Though Republicans may attempt to convince us otherwise, immigrants entering our nation through the southern border are fleeing violence and desperately seeking a country that will provide protection and meet their basic human needs. Immigrants entering through the southern border often travel hundreds or thousands of miles, enduring incredible hardship and loss, only to be treated as worthless and evil. ICE is committing human rights abuses at the southern border via the criminalization of non-white bodies. People are tossed into cages with concrete beds and rotting food. Children, infants, are separated from their families without explanation or understanding. Regardless of documentation, race, or nationality, all people deserve to be treated with dignity and kindness. We must lead from a place of empathy and demonstrate to future generations that compassion cultivates unity and strength. Our current and past immigration policies are formed from fear and prejudice and do more harm than good.
We are not claiming that the ICE system isn't perfect. We're not saying that things are completely different and that everything needs to change. Coming from my personal experience working in the Homeland Security Division in New York City, and specifically with people in ICE, I can tell you firsthand, ICE has changed from what the intended purpose originally was. The intended purpose was not to put people in cages. The intended purpose was not to separate families. And the intended purpose was not to bring psychological damage to these people seeking asylum. People are not criminals. These people are regular people trying to come safe to the U.S. We are all immigrants, whether you are white, black, Hispanic, or not. We are all immigrants. This entire country was founded on immigration. So you cannot sit here and tell me that someone should be stuck in a cage because they want to make their family have a better life.
All right, thank you. Okay. Does either side want to pose a question or raise a point with the other?
I would.
Okay, go ahead.
So on your point about immigrants not being threatening to the well-being of American citizens, the Morton Memo explicitly states that we will be focusing and prioritizing those who are threats to the citizens of our country. So at that point, where do we disagree, and why exactly should we not be focusing on putting those that seek to do harm to citizens in prison?
You got the microphone right there.
Then how come half the people in the prisons are people who are just seeking asylum? How come all these people are crying? How come all these people are having psychological damage when most of them aren't even criminals?
Every person who crosses the border illegally is a criminal. You conceded in the last round that they are all criminals and they committed misdemeanors. They crossed the border illegally. That makes them criminals.
Then what's the difference between them and refugees? Aren't they just refugees to the United States?
Refugees are seekers of asylum under persecution or threat of death or for political reasons. Immigrants are those that cross the border in order for better economic prosperity.
Can I respond?
Go, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
So I'd like to refute some of the statistics that you shared earlier. According to the Cato Institute, and this is a quote, a direct quote, all immigrants have a lower criminal incarceration rate, and there are lower crime rates in the neighborhoods where they live. It's difficult to determine criminal conviction rates for undocumented immigrants, but unlike every other state, Texas keeps track of the immigration statuses of convicted criminals and the crimes that they committed. The Cato Institute analyzed this data and found that illegal immigration conviction rates are about half those of native-born Americans, without any controls for age, education, ethnicity, or any other characteristic. The illegal immigrant conviction rates for homicide, larceny, and sex crimes are also below those of native-born Americans. The criminal conviction rates for legal immigrants are the lowest of all. And so while there may be a few instances of violence occurring from undocumented immigrants, I would argue that we should focus more energy and resources on the crimes that are being committed by native-born Americans.
That is exactly our argument, because when we say we want to revert to the Morton Memo, we say we want to focus on those committing crimes. So your argument is not a refutation, but rather it further supports ours, that we need to be giving a high priority to those that pose national security threats. We're in agreement here.
So let me jump in on this about the statistics that the Republicans first set out and then that you commented on. What I'm getting then from the exchange here is that the Democrats, you folks aren't necessarily taking issue with those specific statistics, or you are?
Well, I take issue with the use of the word criminal.
Okay, all right. But in terms of the statistics on crime that they were quoting, you're not taking issue with that necessarily. What your counterpoint is that those numbers are either at or below the average for any random sample of the American population. I just want to make sure that's the back and forth there. Okay. And are you both then also saying that you are in favor of reforming and changing the way that ICE works rather than abolishing it? Am I hearing that correctly? That was a little murky to me for the Democrats. Where are you on that?
I think what we're saying is that not that ICE needs to be completely abolished and that a whole new thing has to start up But we're saying that there needs to be better precautions and better policies taken. Like, there needs to be these people need to be better taken care of. The way ICE is treating these people is inhumane. They're taking rid of their basic human rights. And anyone who steps foot on the United States soil deserves any rights that we all have in this room. Because
All right, so I'd like to answer that with a couple of points. Firstly, we agree, in not necessarily with a radical change, but specifically going back to ICE's guiding papers of the Morton memos, which were released in 2012, which do allow for officer discretion when it comes to deciding which people should be followed, who needs to be arrested, and who needs to be deported. It has a large number of the people who you talk about would technically be exempt under the Morton memos, which would include people who come to the U.S. under the age of 16, those who are not above age 30, those who have continuously resided in the U.S. for at least 5 years before 2012, and all those who are currently in school, have a GED, or are honorably discharged veterans. This actually solves a lot of the problems because it also reduces significantly the number of people who you're taking in. And the problem is that when you have just a large number of people who are being brought into detention centers, it's hard to take care of all of them. We get that. What we would like to see is a more efficient means of targeting the actual threats, which are out there. Which brings me to my second point, which is about, technically speaking, the lower rate of criminality among illegal immigrants. That is, to some extent, that makes intuitive sense. If you're already in the country, if you've already committed a crime just by entering the country illegally, you're probably going to want to keep your head down. Under the Morton Memos system, that more or less works because if they themselves are not, posing a clear and present danger to actual American citizens, we've got other bigger fish to fry. And on that point, much of what you've discussed relates to ICE's enforcement and removal operations, which is the side that gets a lot of the flack from the media because they have to do, in some ways, a very uncomfortable job of going after people who've already entered the U.S., are residing away from the border, and need to be brought back. You didn't mention that much about Homeland Security investigations, which handles most forms of transnational crime, organized or otherwise. And they go after people like sex traffickers, child pornography distributors, gun smugglers, drug dealers. And they are an essential part of American national security as it is. So when you suggest reforms, do you plan on doing anything to HSI?
Okay, so while I cannot speak for college Democrats by taking this position, or all Democrats, I do support the abolishment of ICE, so I would like to make that clear. Also, to address what you just said, also from the Cato Institute, I'm sorry, this is not from the Cato Institute, this is from sociologists Michael Light and Ty Miller from Columbia University. These two researchers teamed up with Purdue sociologist Brian C. Kelly to look at how higher legal immigrant populations affected drug arrests, drug overdose deaths, and DUI arrests. They found large and significantly associated reductions in drug arrests, drug overdose deaths, and DUI arrests, with no significant relationship between increased illegal immigration and DUI deaths. The criminalization of undocumented immigrants at the border is purely for political purposes. There is no need to be decreasing the amount of undocumented immigrants who enter our country. In fact, according to the Pew Research Center, immigrants today account for 13.6% of the U.S. population, which is nearly triple the share in 1970. However, today's immigrant share remains below the record 14.8% share in 1890, when 9.2 million immigrants lived in the US. There is nothing wrong with undocumented immigrants entering our country. There's no inherent risk in undocumented immigrants entering our country.
Can I respond to that? Sure. Okay. So a couple of points to dissect. The first being that we should abolish ICE. Remember what Sebastian just said. HSI goes into foreign countries, particularly in South America. They work with local task force. They work with local police to ensure a decrease in human trafficking. When they abolish ICE, they take those programs away. They ensure that human trafficking is allowed to increase. They ensure that weapons and ammunition crimes are allowed to increase. Remember what we said in our opening statement. We decrease crime. They do nothing to ensure that crime stays decreased. In fact, they're going to allow it to directly increase with the abolishment of ICE. Then on to their second point. They say that immigrants are not criminals, which is never a statement that we make. We say that some are. We do not give a blanket statement that say that all immigrants are inherently criminals. We say that we should be looking towards the ones that pose a threat to America, which is exactly what you do when you look towards the Morton memo. We never really directly refute each other here. We're both in agreement that we should be focusing on actual criminals, not people that come into the country just seeking security.
You guys said before anyone who crosses the border is a criminal.
And then we gave a list.
So if you're treating them all like criminals, that means that they're all criminals, and that means they all go to federal prison. So you're basically contradicting yourself. So I think I speak on behalf of the audience. We're a little confused on what you mean by criminal.
So, yes, technically speaking, any person who crosses the border into the United States illegally, by whatever means, is technically speaking a criminal. They violated federal law. However, what we have suggested with our proposed changes to the way that enforcement and removal operations works is that those people, while they're technically criminals, are not the priority. What we have suggested is that by reintroducing a priority system, we target the actual criminals who also happen to be illegal immigrants.
Okay.
Can I jump in with just two questions? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the flow there, but I want to ask the Republicans here a question. Do you accept any of what your Democrat counterparts originally set forward as what they were characterizing as the abuses of ICE currently, and I guess for lack of a better word, you can give me a better one if you want, Democrats, the overzealous enforcement by some ICE officers? Is that something that is in dispute on your side? I know you want to reform and change it, but on that particular point of assertion, do you accept that? And then I have a similar question for the Democrats. So go back.
Yes, as we stated in our opening statement, we understand that the hiring spree that occurred under the Trump administration significantly decreased the effectiveness of training and vetting procedures. That's an issue that we recognize and want to solve through the reformation.
Okay, and then the big question, obviously, for removing ICE, and I understand you're speaking for yourself, and that's what you're supposed to do up here. What are you going to replace it with to provide this, or are you suggesting that we have what is often termed open borders? We have nothing, no kind of check. How would you?
Okay, so ICE is a department under the Department of is an organization under the Department of Homeland Security. I am not advocating for the abolishment of the Department of Homeland Security. We have a department that is tasked with the protection of American citizens to work against acts of terrorist or other dangerous intentions. I'm not advocating for completely open borders, but I am advocating for the abolishment of ICE. I'm not going to claim to have all the answers, but I know that ICE is not what's working for our country. And, well, not for our country, but for our global society. And I'd like to address, I'm sorry, if you want, yeah, go
No,
ahead,
it's okay.
sorry.
I just want to clarify what you said, or get a better understanding. So you would be arguing then for repurposing a structure that is already in place to provide the same service that ICE is providing, and you want to get rid of ICE because of the fact that based on what you are seeing that it has done recently, it's kind of delegitimized itself. Is that fair? I mean, I'm putting a lot of words in your mouth there, but I'm just trying to get the argument.
The organization of ICE has very much distanced itself from its original purpose. They were not meant to be this violent, this not proactive is the wrong word, but very forward towards the wrong people. They're breaking into houses of people who have 5 children, work at minimum wage jobs, and are no threat to society whatsoever. They're not knocking down the doors of drug dealers every single day. So ICE is losing its original purpose, and I don't speak on behalf of Bina, but I think what she's trying to say is that there needs to be a better system put in place, and ICE needs to regroup and reevaluate what their job is.
Okay, we just have about a minute left. Final comments from either team. The Democrats were just talking. Republicans, do you want to go first? And then just very quickly, 30 seconds or so for.
Well, ICE has problems. We're not going to deny that. However, it should be pointed out that they simply are engaged in a job that is unpleasant. It's a job that, by its very nature, in the current political climate, is going to generate a lot of knee-jerk moral outrage and a lot of negative emotion. But, however, that does not detract from the importance, the necessity of this job. They keep the United States of America safe.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. And Democrats' final word, 30 seconds.
What we want to leave here is saying that ICE has lost its intentional purpose. It is not meant to do all these criminal acts and going after people who honestly are no harm to society. They're people just walking down the street like all of us. And for us to back an organization that is willing to just take people out of their homes without any background whatsoever and not help people who are immigrants as we are immigrants ourselves is just honestly not the American way. It's not who we are, it's not what we're supposed to be, and we honestly need to redefine what ICE is and what it's supposed to be doing.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks to both of teams. Okay, our final topic. And these are still going to stay the Democrats over here? Is that what we're doing? Okay, all right. All right, we'll get started. So, this is a longer subsection before we get to the audience questions. This is the overall policy solutions and the overview of the entire situation. For the Democrats here, we have Alex Keegan and Noah Essling. And for the Republicans, we have Augustus LaRue and Cohen Weaver. Since this is a new section, should we do a coin flip again? We want to do that? All right, we'll let the Republicans call it this time. It's 50% proposition, by the way. Heads? Whoa. Heads. Okay. All right, you want to go first or second? All right, great.
This country is in crisis. We're facing humanitarian emergency on our southern border. Millions struggle to escape the harsh realities of their homeland. Conditions in ICE detention centers continue to degrade. The situation grows dimmer. And in the words of the late Elijah Cummings, none of us would have our children in that position. But that is not really the crisis we're debating here today, is it? Because none of us are going to stand up here and say, yeah, this is fine. We, the Republican Party, want to fix our broken immigration system too. House Resolution 586, Fix the Immigration Loopholes Act, to reunite children with their families and de-incentivize illegal crossings. House Resolution 517, Fix Asylum Loopholes Act, to close asylum loopholes and give priority to those whose lives are directly threatened. H.R. 3442, to prevent foreign interference in elections by non-citizens. H.R. 2124, to create an easier path to citizenship for visa holders. H.R. 3855, S2778, all Republican bills written by Republicans, sponsored by Republicans, waiting for Democrat approval. The immigration crisis is not the source of contention here. The real crisis is that in the face of such a travesty, that only one side is willing to come to the table and find a solution. that to so many politicians in this country, the thought of having to work with a Republican is more reprehensible than having children trafficked to a foreign nation and then locked away. That said, allow me to lay out the current issue at hand. Current estimates by Yale University place the illegal immigrant population in this nation from anywhere from 16 to 29 million. And because citizenship does not reflect apportionment, I tell you tonight that regardless of whether they show up at the ballot box, the simple presence of this population serves as a major interference in our elections. Why are they here? Because states like California find it fit to pass laws extending Medicare to 138,000 illegal immigrants, while 130,000 of their own citizens are homeless on the streets. One of many sanctuary cities that also sees widespread exploitation of illegal immigrants via under-the-table jobs while also undercutting the American worker. And yet, I've still said nothing about the drug trade, the vicious gangs like MS-13 that thrive on illegal immigrant recruitment. But on this stage today, we come armed with solutions. Voter ID laws, the end of sanctuary city law, or lack thereof, the revision and enforcement of labor laws to ensure worker citizenship, the equipping of law enforcement with the tools they need and mandating them to verify the citizenship status of those being placed on record. But to that end, we only solve one of two problems. That plan must include alleviating the monetary cost of immigration, upholding a merit-based system, and scaling back the waiting period on immigration. Anything that can be done to help immigrants without circumventing the law or sacrificing the general welfare of the nation, I assure you we are amenable to, just as many House Republicans have tried and failed. While time constraints prevent me from exploring these solutions with greater detail, I assure you we stand ready to discuss and defend them, however long our Democratic colleagues see fit. I'll take this time to remind everyone that we're debating the world as it is, not as it should be. I doubt that anyone in this room is experiencing this topic for the first time, but I'm willing to bet for many of you it's the first time hearing the Republican position out of a Republican's mouth. How else would the idea be cemented in so many people's minds that this somehow boils down to racism or xenophobia or Nazism? Why put in the effort to have an open mind when you can just slander your opponent and throw their ideas out the window just because they were different than theirs, or yours, rather? An unfortunate byproduct of our divided nation that I hope we can avoid tonight. And keeping that attention on the stage. The Democratic position stands at a crossroads right now. I urge this. Come to the table. Work with the Republicans. Swear to uphold the rules that your own party wrote and signed into law. Those of us standing with the Republicans make up a broad range of ideals, a testament to cooperation. I'll say that in my own personal view, that the United States, as the greatest country in the world, has a responsibility and a duty to help people. All people. But how can we help and support tens of millions of non-citizens when we can't even help our own people? Open borders is not an option. I don't know if that's where this is headed, but it's not an option. Not when we have millions of our own citizens that struggle to find work, be independent, hell, even just put food on the table. But we have to start somewhere to fix this crisis, and it starts with incentivizing legal immigration. It starts with echoing the ideal that immigrants enrich our country, and they do, and then seeing that vision through by promoting a merit-based, lawful, documented procedure. The solution is there. I invite you all to the table. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome all to this debate tonight here on immigration. Thank you for being here. Appreciate all the support, and love to see Maxwell Auditorium packed. Tonight's topic about immigration, and we're up here to talk about what our party's stances are going to be moving forward in policy positions, et cetera, et cetera. However, firstly, we believe all people to be equal, no matter who they are or where they came from. As we are a nation of immigrants, and as our Statue of Liberty states, give me your tired, your poor, your hurled masses yearning to breathe free. Today we see an administration actively working to discriminate against people of color. The Muslim ban, the promotion of white supremacy. That example would be Charlottesville, that there are good people on both sides. That's untrue. And the children in cages. This is all indicative of a larger picture. Now, we will see tonight if those cross the aisle here will either be supportive of this administration's policies, whether they will be complacent, which is to choose the side of the oppressor, or whether they will work with us in overturning the human rights violations that this administration created. To the larger picture, we must understand what led us to this point. The extent of our income inequality is due to Republican tax cuts and deregulation. These policies gave way to rising concentration of wealth, which gives way to economic strife. This gives rise to populism in politics. And Karl Marx believed that the working poor would rise up when such conditions are met. However, under the GOP, they understand this and promote divisiveness and blame the lack of growth for working poor whites on that of immigration of people of color. To divide the working class and scapegoat for political purposes, I believe, is abhorrent, and so does our party. Yet, this is their playbook. And we now see where that leads to. We saw it here on campus. We continue to see it continuing in our nation. So for those bills that you threw on the floor, I personally like to read them because I'd give you a full view as to why we probably rejected them as a party. It's not just we hate Republicans, it's a little bit more than that. I will say, for an example, Michael Bennett did actually have an immigration policy in 2013 that expanded funding to ports of entry for screening of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking, and all the aspects of any large felonies that could be created by any immigrant. However, that got shot down. He had a bipartisan support, but the House at the time, which was controlled by Republicans, did not see it fit to pass it. It would have been working now, and it still would be working now, and all we would have to do for this debate is stand up here and say, how can we improve this legislation? But again, we're not. We're here facing xenophobia, racism, again and again. It's 2020, and it's the same playbook we've seen in history throughout the 30s.
So we'll go back and forth with rebuttals. I have questions for both sides that I might interject at some point, but Republicans, do you want to go first?
I think it's very telling when we start off the night already painting one side as being racists and, doing everything I said I hoped we wouldn't do in my opening statement, but, it's, I guess, to be expected. So, also fitting, actually, no, one of the things that's fitting is when we started off citing Karl Marx, very fitting because in both instances in Karl Marx and this opening statement, there's no feasible plan that's been set forward, nothing that we currently have any evidence will actually work or play out in the end. But then coming back to the first statement, I just wanted to throw that in there. But coming back to the first statement in regards to how the current systems in place in some way support white supremacy or support racism, and I heard you mention the Muslim travel ban. So in the spirit of including statistics and including facts, which I think we've done a good job so far, we'll keep going. But I want to throw something else out there for you. There are about 2 billion Muslims in the world. You mentioned we had a Muslim ban. There are about 135 million individuals that are currently affected by the travel ban. Bear in mind, not all of those are Muslims. There are substantial Catholic populations, Christian populations rather, in those countries as well. And of those 135 million, 80 million of them are from Iran, whom we currently have tensions on the verge of boiling over with, of whom we're barring from this country to avoid any kind of visa overstays or avoid any kind of national security risk. Bear in mind, because again, and that's ultimately what I'd point out as well, is this travel ban is not barring everybody from the country. It is establishing a system wherein people cannot abuse the visa system and create an overstay, which is something we'd go on to discuss a little bit later. But to that same effect, I'd point out that 7 of the 19 9/11 hijackers used that same system. 7 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were visa overstays, a loophole that still exists today that the travel ban is looking to fix ultimately. So there right there we have national security as one reason. We have a very diverse population actually that falls under this travel ban, and a population of over 2 billion Muslims. I would go on to address other points, but I'm not certain what other points there were. But I would return the floor to anybody else who would like to have it.
First of all, Gus, great speech, by the way. You made the comment that we want legal immigration. We want our immigrants to come here legally. Now, I can agree, and I'm pretty sure everyone can agree, that everyone wants legal immigration. However, what the Republicans have been doing is trying to diminish the way that immigrants can enter here legally. I will go over those in a few seconds. We have asylum. One of the ways that the Republican Party, most specifically Donald Trump, has tried to cut asylum is in metering. A specific city, San Isidro, has approximately 100 asylum seekers across the border each day on that border checkpoint. With metering, they have turned it down to 20 each day. I don't know why they would do that besides blatant racism and xenophobia and the fact that they do not want Mexicans or Latin Americans to enter this country. With that, there are over 11,000 asylum seekers on a wait list in Mexico. Now, I would also like to go back to other legal immigration systems, such as the lottery that we have, where you enter your name and hopefully that you will be able to be selected for a specific visa requirement in the United States. Through the Trump administration, they have lowered the amount of people who are able to accept lotteries in the United States. And there are many other countless ways which the Republican Party has tried to diminish the amount of legal immigration into the United States. Now, can we give it another reason besides the fact that the Republican Party, Donald Trump stated on the first day of his announcement for president that Mexicans are rapists? You could boil it down to blatant racism and xenophobia, and you know what? Yeah, I'm going to boil it down to blatant racism and xenophobia. Thank you.
So it's easy to put labels on people when you mask the statistics behind libel and slander. So let's first look at actual asylum cases, because a lot of our Democratic counterparts like to claim that, oh, all these people coming over the border are these poor, downtrodden people, and their fear of persecution, and all of their claims are legitimate. So according to United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is a government agency, so we can all trust that statistic, in fiscal year 2016, there were 115,399 affirmative asylum cases. That means that the people claiming asylum were physically present in the U.S., regardless of their entry, whether it was visa or border crossing. Only 10% of those claims went through immigration, after going through immigration court, were found to be viable. So you're making policy based on, you're doing a blanket statement that everyone crossing the border each fiscal year, their asylum cases are true. And 10%, I mean, and I'm not saying all these judges, even the most liberal judges on immigration courts, maybe give on their docket an 80% approval rate, but it boils down to a 10% approval rate for affirmative cases. Then in terms of, where did we get to? Oh, we got to visas. So we talked about people in the United States on visas, but there are plenty of people. There are hundreds of thousands of people overseas, hundreds of thousands of people in one country alone who apply for U.S. green cards and U.S. visas. And the issue with that is when you prioritize people that are crossing the border illegally because it's more convenient for them, that they get priority over people who have waited 15 years to come to this country. I mean, we're talking about, there's the idea of stapling a green card to a diploma with an F1 visa. And there's 1.1 million student visas that are given out each year in the United States, but there's an 800,000 visa quota for just people who are overseas. So you're saying, screw you, you've waited 15 years, but because you came across the border illegally, violated US code, that you get priority. So that's one statistic.
Sure, yeah. My main question is, then why the hell don't we change it from a 15-year waiting list to actually incentivize legal immigration so that we end this debate for it over, like right there?
So let me jump in on that. I am a little murky on what the Democratic policy platform is here. I have a good sense of what you don't like and why you don't like it. But can you say a little more about what you would replace it with?
Well, first, replacing immigration, replacing the immigration system in the United States is obviously very convoluted. Obviously, there are parts that Democrats and Republicans don't agree on, but I can safely say this for most of the Democratic Party, that we see the current administration's views on immigration as basic infringements on human rights within the United States. Immigration and asylum is a basic human right set out by the United Nations in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And right now, we can see that the Trump administration and Republican Party policies in general are infringing on these rights. So there are many things I would like to be able to discuss with my Republican colleagues on here, on the stage right now, about how we should set up policies that would not infringe on these human rights.
Well, let me jump back in again, because I still am really murky on this. So let me take the previous administration, okay, the administration of Barack Obama. All right, he was sometimes referred to as the deporter in chief. All right, for the deportations. So do you want to go, for lack of a better phrase, with more open immigration than was under the Obama administration? Where do you want to go with what you want to replace this with?
Well, to your characterization, yes, we would like a more open system, okay. But I would not say that it's just open. We would also support laws and regulation within the immigration system. But right now, the instance of waiting 15 to 20 years, depending on the country that you're coming from, because of the quota system that's set up, we see that as problematic. So firstly, increase the quota to go up. Secondly, for those who are overstaying, provide a way or system for an extended work visa, so that way we can continue to take their taxes, because they still have to pay taxes because they get a tax ID number, and continue to let them contribute to our society in good faith. Obviously, if they are criminals, even though at large they commit crimes about half the rate, we still need to enforce laws in our society. But currently, the laws are written wrong. So
I'm going to probe the Republicans in a minute, but can I continue my probe with you folks? Okay. So in your vision of what would be a fair system that respects human rights, or I forgot the phrase that you used here, but are there would-be immigrants that you would want to restrict coming to the United States over others? What would be your criteria? Do you think, you're suggesting that some decisions will need to be made, and there will need to be a process for that.
So
and the border will need to be enforced somehow, but let's just, how would you prioritize who to let in, I guess is what it's.
So those who have committed crimes before, especially violent crimes like domestic violence, committing murder, homicide, vehicular manslaughter, those obviously would be people that we would not be looking to bring into our country, but those people that are there seeking asylum here and seeking immigration to our country for economic strife reasons, or religious persecution, or just a terrible upbringing where there's gang violence all around and they're being, beaten to death and they need to get their kids out of there, then yes, we would accept those, and the process in itself would be more streamlined, and we would expand quotas, cut down on the waiting line times, and really actually incentivize legal immigration.
Okay.
Yeah, but before we get probed, there are a couple of points. I'm going to join the I'm still a little murky club, because in my opening statement, I made a series of statements regarding to the degradation of ICE facility conditions. I made a series of statements saying about how we need to reform the current legal immigration process. You're refuting points that my partner and I have never made. And so I guess my confusion comes from what have we proposed? What have we propositioned thus far that you actually take issue with? Because I talked about increasing funding in ICE and getting these people the basic living amenities that they need. I talked
voter
about
ID law, I heard.
Voter ID law.
Okay.
My speech is in my bag, but
eliminating sanctuary cities, I think I heard.
Sanctuary city law, doing away with that. What exactly do you disagree with? Where is the contention on the stage?
Voter ID laws? I mean, did we not just have an entire civil rights revolution to get away from voter ID laws? I mean, like, sorry for my loss of words there, but voter ID laws are just...
Your partner might want to jump in. He might have a word.
Please. Can't wrap my mind around that.
I mean, neither can I, but I guess I'm the one who's going to be talking. Voter ID laws, basically, where can I begin to talk about why we should not have them? They're, I guess one place I can start is that voter ID laws are basically started because Republicans did not want certain people to be voting for them, so they basically decided maybe let's not let these certain people be able to vote at all. That's why you see voter ID laws started in many deep south states where there are large populations of people of color, because they want to make sure that those people are not able to vote for them or vote Democrat or vote at all. So that's basically first where I want to start that.
What do you think a voter ID law is? I'm up here.
Yeah, you took a walk.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move our cameras, so we're
Yeah.
good. Yeah, okay.
Just give me a basic, like, what do you think a voter ID law is? In general.
In general, so similar to that of like getting your license DMV, you got to have a proof of location and a proof of residence, so to say that you're there.
Excuse me.
So that
Do you have a state-issued ID? Do you have a state-issued ID? Sorry.
Hey, before you go and do this, how many drivers are in New York City?
Do you have a state-issued ID?
No, seriously, no.
Do you have a state-issued ID?
No, seriously.
Sir.
All right, we
do
get
you
the
have a
point.
state-issued
We get
ID?
the point. We get the point. We get the point.
Do you have a state? So I fail to see that in what world would the average American citizen, and this has been done numerous times, in which people have gone to inner city Harlem, inner city Chicago, and asked people off the street, what I just did, do you have a state-issued ID? And they've said, yes, because this idea that a huge amount of our population is lacking
Because they
state...
drive cars.
Well, I notice an odd parallel here, because as soon as there's any traction about getting voter ID laws on the books, what goes and happens is that Democratic legislatures then go and pass things like the New York State Greenlight Bill, which issues state-sponsored IDs to undocumented immigrants. And so in doing so, that leads to the possibility of more corrupted elections. So I'm trying to see kind of where your
if you're talking about
ideas coming from.
I have to respond to the timekeepers and the prompts that they're giving me. But in fairness, I just want to extend it one more minute, then we'll get into your concluding statements, okay? For the Republicans, I have a question on your policy positions that you put forward, and we listed some of them. They did sound like they were all in the category of restrictions of one kind or another. So I want to ask if there is support there among the two of you for a newer one that the Supreme Court has allowed to go forward for now while litigation is being considered, and that is a wealth test for people seeking a green card. Is that the way that you would want to sort out immigrants who want to come into the country?
I mean, ultimately, the proposal that we would bring forth is a merit-based system.
But define merit quickly. What does that mean?
Merit, it would be the skills that one brings to the table,
Skills?
how
Okay.
well they would assimilate to the country.
They're white. That's what he means. They're white.
Question, is Canada racist?
All right, there we go. All right, we're gonna get emails from Ontario now. Thank you for that.
Because if you look at the Canadian merit system, it's high skilled labor, and it's those who are seeking higher education. And that's only what we're just advocating that is only one of the types of visas that we should be promoting, instead of, because like in the US, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you can apply for a visa faster than if you are overseas. So what we want to do is we want to import overseas labor, people who have those high skills and have those educational pursuits from places like China. India has the highest rate of visa seekers.
Okay.
So areas like that.
All right, we're going to move to the concluding remarks because we want to leave enough time for the audience to be able to ask their questions. So the the Republicans started, correct? Mm-hmm. So why don't you start with your concluding remarks, and then we'll hear last from them. So go ahead, Democrats.
Just pick up the mess here.
My policy positions are all over the floor.
It's okay. Okay, so this section was a little contentious, as you could tell. Apologies for any of that, if that was unwarranted or unwelcome for any of you. Again, I started out the speech by painting and even posing the question of those with us tonight on this side of the aisle, if they are going to be in opposition of what's going on in the current administration, in complacence, or in agreement. Now, I'm not saying that I know each and every one of you guys fully, but when I posed that question, there was no answer to it that I could tell that was other than, yes, we're complacent, or we support. Some of the policies presented, like the voter ID laws, are just another way of promoting and excluding those of us that are, of color from voting. I mean, you look at who has a driver's license as those who are driving. So if you were to go to somewhere like New York City, not many people need a driver's license, right? And so to require those IDs for voting, let's say a single mother of 3 who's working 2 jobs, minimum wage, she can't really have time to vote, but she's going to try to make it to the voting precinct. But instead, she has to go to the DMV and stand for 5 hours and wait for a voter ID card. It's just yet another hoop to jump through to be able to allow those of us in our nation that are colored to vote. And it is in itself racist. I mean, look up the word in Merriam-Webster dictionary. I don't know what else to say.
I would like to start off by saying that we've heard both sides, Republicans and Democrats. We have seen that Democrats have been saying maybe not as stringent policies as the Republicans. Let's be more. What I want to bring it back to is basically this: Democrats make decisions mostly out of compassion. Republicans make decisions in policy mostly out of fear. They're fearful of these immigrants coming into this nation. We want and welcome most of these immigrants coming into our nation regardless. It's stated on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, you're hungry, everything else. Maybe it's not, maybe. Now then again, politics is not set in stone. Everything is fluid. I'm not saying that we have the best ideas, and I'm saying they have the worst ideas, but we need some discrepancy. And what I'm saying is that when it comes to this, what we have stated before, when it comes to immigration courts, when it comes to visas, when it comes to anything else that qualifies legal immigration, and also when it comes to illegal immigration, the Democrats are not trying to basically dismantle basic human rights. And we have seen the Republicans do that time and time again with this administration. Thank you.
So unfortunately, I don't feel like we were able to discuss actual policies as much tonight because half the people on the stage came right out of the starting block with the same old adage that you see with any kind of immigration debate, is that I'm going to call you a racist, I'm going to call you a xenophobe, and we're going to base the discussion around that. So no policy, at least strict policy, was mentioned from our Democrats. And you said that we are that
this is their conclusion.
You said that we argue out of fear and you argue out of compassion. I agree, you argue out of passion, but we argue and base policy out of facts. Statue of Liberty, I do agree. Bring me your poor, tired masses yearning to breathe free. But when it comes to democratic policy, it only focuses on those who want to breathe free that are closest to the United States, not those halfway around the world. I want to read you some quotes. All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large number of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they might hold otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders by hiring a new record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens, etc., etc. That is not the words of President Donald Trump, nor any Republican president. It is the words of President Barack Obama. Perhaps real reform means strong border security, and we can build on progress my administration has already made, putting more boots on the southern border than any time in history and reducing illegal crossings to their lowest levels in 40 years. That was by President Obama. I made a mistake. The previous one was by President Clinton. President Clinton, not Hillary, Bill. The American people are fundamentally pro-legal immigration and anti-illegal immigration. We will only pass comprehensive reform when we recognize this fundamental concept. First, illegal immigration is wrong, and a primary goal of comprehensive immigration reform must be to dramatically curtail future legal immigration. And that was by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator of New York. As you can see, illegal immigration and legal immigration is not a partisan issue, and it shouldn't be, but it has been made by hyperpolarization. For years, the Democrats have been on the side of what the Republicans are offering right now. We haven't even talked about the economic impacts of legal and illegal immigration. I agree. Immigrants, whether legal or illegal, do provide some economic benefit. However, we do still see a $116.5 billion deficit, which accounts for, that's including the reductions in the tax money that undocumented immigrants pay, a $116.5 billion deficit in state and federal coffers because of unvetted illegal immigration. We acknowledge that there is a crisis on the border and that things must be done to curtail the any poor conditions in detention centers and the flood of illegal immigrants across the border every year, every month, and sometimes every day. We have offered actual policy that can be put in place. Policy including voter ID laws, because just like the SAT, raise your hand if you took the SAT or the ACT. Did they give you a photo ID, and did you have to present a photo ID when you took the exam? Yes or no? Yes. So we have more security in college admission exams than we do in the most fundamental aspect of the democratic process, voting. My time, thank you. We believe in providing a pathway to citizenship for those who have put in the time, who have done it properly, who have gone through the system. And we are all for fixing the visa system, whether that be expanding quotas in certain areas and shrinking quotas in other areas. One of the policies my debate partner and I came up with was revising the I-9 form policy that employers have to use with undocumented immigrants. If you've worked at the university, you've filled out an I-9 form. It verifies that you can work in the U.S. and that you have to use a passport, a social security number to prove who you are. So, another policy that we're proposing is that employers who knowingly hire undocumented immigrants without an I-9 or who do not verify I-9 information should receive financial punitive consequences for hiring or for not verifying these I-9 forms. And we're not going to use these employers' testimonies, these employers' presentation of the lack of I-9s by undocumented immigrants to immediately deport undocumented immigrants. Instead, we will do like we do in any other case of eviction or what have you, give them proper prior notice that they have to leave the United States and that they can go through the court system to appeal if they want, because they are entitled to due process just as every other person in this country. They can use the court system, but at the end of the day, it's going to come out to law and it's going to come out to order.
15 seconds. You got 15 seconds.
Most cost $25. If you can't afford that, you can get it for free. That's all I say.
All right. Okay. So let's give another round of applause for all the debaters, including this. Okay, we've got about a half an hour for questions, and there's no way we're going to get to them all. So we'll get that person right there with their hand up, Zane, and then this woman right here will get your hand up. We'll get the other mic. Where's Kenneth?
Yeah, I got you.
Go ahead.
I have a question for the college Republicans. I'm looking at a study
I'm
right now.
sorry, I forgot to say this. If you could, to the degree possible, we've got all the debaters assembled, so if it's on a specific topic as well, then the right people can get up to respond.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it's for the two up there right now. So in-person voter fraud is actually very rare. Since 2000, there were only 31 credible allegations of voter impersonation. So I guess I'm wondering, why do 34 states have voter impersonation laws or voter ID laws that target minority people when voter ID fraud is very rare? It's more likely that someone will try to take an SAT that isn't theirs for someone else than someone actually going and trying to impersonate another voter.
Well, I would say voter impersonation, that's not particularly what we're addressing here. It's a part of it, but a minor part. What we're primarily referring to is the fact that a lack of voter ID laws allows non-citizens or illegal immigrants, in the case of voter fraud, would allow them to vote without any kind of check or balance at all. I mean, our opponents refer to it as jumping through a hoop, but ultimately it's the most fundamental check to ensure the sanctity of our elections. In 2008, a study actually came out from George Mason at Old Dominion University that estimated about 6.4% of non-citizens voted in that election, and that's because there was no voter ID checks done. They interviewed, I believe, the number was upwards of 8. I'm not going to venture a guess, but it was about 6.4% that said they did in fact vote in that election. So in terms of voter impersonation, I can't venture any statistics, I can't venture any facts on that subject, but the fact that I can venture forward and substantiate is that non-citizens do in fact vote in the election to a very wide extent. And bear in mind that 6.4% of now 16 to 29 million illegal immigrant population in the United States.
Brief comment from the Democrats on that, or?
Yeah, I would.
It's on.
Working?
It's on.
Okay. I would just inquire about the source of that, the 6.4, and that's merely all I have.
George Mason and Old Dominion Universities.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello. I think this is working. Okay. My question is for the Republicans as well. For Americans on reservations who may or may not have permanent addresses, who often are required to have P.O. boxes instead of permanent addresses, how do you propose that voter ID registration would work?
Well, I don't believe that voter ID necessarily. I don't believe you necessarily need an address because there's different forms that you can provide. We mentioned driver's licenses before. If that's a problem, then I would absolutely advise, or I would strongly be in favor of revising that. It's certainly, if you are a legal citizen, let me just say this outright: if you are a legal citizen, then I fully support your right to vote. And if that's an existing problem, then I believe I speak for the Republicans that would deserve attention.
And I'd be very small L liberal on the law. If they have a P.O. box address, that's better than what we have in place right now, which is nothing on record. So.
Okay, we'll get this woman in the back here with her hand up. We'll work our way sort of around the room, and there's a gentleman with the orange Syracuse shirt right in front of you, Zane, but go ahead.
Hello. Am I allowed to ask 2 questions, or am I just limited to
2 questions?
One? Yeah.
Let's stick with 1, and we'll come back to you if we run out of questions.
Yeah,
How's
no
that?
problem.
I'll remember you got a second question.
No problem.
Pick your favorite one.
This one's directed to the college Republicans. Should undocumented immigrants return back to their respective countries, what would you account for a lot of the low-wage workers occurring within the dairy industry, where 83% of the workers in the dairy industry are undocumented immigrants?
I think, well, policy-wise, I think I addressed that quickly in my closing argument, if you will, that we would institute kind of like an I-9 form policy, because the idea is that you don't have undocumented immigrants who aren't necessarily going to be protected or are going to feel protected by the laws who are going to be undercut by these farmers in the dairy industry. And I mean, really, it's a very, in my mind, it's a very complex thing, because I feel like there's always there's the talking point that undocumented immigrants are taking the jobs that Americans don't want, and I just don't think that's true. I grew up in a cow country, surrounded by, there's this dairy farm down the road, and there's people there's kids in high school who want to work the farms. And then you go on, but I think there's reform in the education policy, because I think education shouldn't push everyone who doesn't want to go to college, because they do that, but that's off track. But I think the initial thing to do is, give them the ability to return to their home country. But that's a talking point. There's no statistical evidence, at least that has been provided. If you'd like to prove that the economy would crash.
I would also venture forward the point that undocumented labor is oftentimes paid not just below the minimum wage, but far below the minimum wage. That the position we're in right now, I understand that we can't overnight suddenly get rid of the entire undocumented workforce. That would destabilize things. But that said, the very fact that we are in this position right now is a negative outcome in and of itself. It is effectively a system where individuals are being exploited for their labor below minimum wage. I would assume that's something that both Democrats and Republicans could agree should not persist in this country. So what have we proposed? We proposed a easier path to citizenship to promote legal work. We are promoting a revision of the I-9 program in order to avoid the continuation of the problem that we currently see in this country, while protecting the rights of everybody that's currently exploited in this current system.
Okay. Get this gentleman here. Oh, okay. You got a quick response, and then we'll get you. Sorry, go ahead.
I believe it was Michigan who conducted a study where they had job applications open for specific farm workers or day labor situations, where 3% of the people who applied were white citizens. And of those 3 people who applied for the job program, only 1.5% of that 3% came back and actually started working on that specific job program. So yeah, the idea that immigrants are taking the jobs that no one wants, and you refuting that statement, is blatantly not factual.
What do you mean by a Michigan study? By the state of Michigan, by Michigan University?
The state of Michigan. I'm sorry, I should have clarified that.
So, well, I don't know. I don't know the data on this, but I would speculate that a lot of farmhands are paid out on the table as it is.
All right, we're going to get this gentleman's question. I think we've run out of our
the
database
table,
here. Go ahead, sir.
But I don't want my milk cost $10 a gallon.
So I have a question for the College Democrats. When you guys say that there is a racist system nowadays that is targeted against Latin America, and I'll tell you guys my personal story. I'm coming as an immigrant to this country, and I'm a dual citizen from Brazil and Italy. And I've been talking to immigration lawyers for the past 3 years, and they told me that the country that would provide me the easiest path to a green card in America would be Brazil, not Italy. I don't get how you guys can come here and say how the system is racist towards Latin Americans, while the people that stayed 15 years waiting for green cards, they're not from Latin America. They're from China and from India because of the policies that you guys instituted in the INA under President Clinton. I want to further my question to how do you guys stand on the 7% quota max per country, and how does that affect Indians and Chinese nationals?
Thank you for that question. I did want to bring that actual quota system up earlier, but I wasn't able to. Yes, the United States does have a 7% Does this work?
It's on. Go ahead.
The United States does have a 7% quota-based system per nation. So that means they were to take 7% of the immigrants coming into this nation, no matter if they're from China, which has a plus 1 billion % population, or I don't know, let's go. Belize. Both nations very much are coming to this nation because they want opportunity for a better life. But again, I believe that Democrats are very much in favor of fixing the quota system so that nations that that have higher populations just in general will have an easier chance of coming here besides nations that have a population of less than 100,000. And by the way, this is something that Democrats have brought up time and time again towards revising. Thank you.
Do you want to jump in on it? The Republicans want to jump in on it?
I mean, without any statistical evidence, I still see that all of the policies being proposed, especially those that deal with undocumented immigration, which has been a lot of the focus of tonight's debate, focuses on those who are still geographically close to the United States. Because you can still expand the quota amount of overseas immigrants. However, you're still going to have that 15 to 20-year wait period that does not exist when you live in a landlocked nation in either South America or Central America or North America.
I saw some hands up over here, one here, and then we'll get the second microphone here. Do you want Kenneth? But go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, so I have a question for the college Republicans.
Where are you?
And I want to know what...
She's right here. Oh, I just wanted to know where you were. You couldn't see where you were
okay,
talking.
so I'm right here, everyone.
Okay.
I want to know what warrants any child to be detained for 20 days. 2 seconds of detainment is still too much, and New York Times found that 70% of detained children had PTSD after. So I'd like to hear how you defend this, and what do you propose to do in this situation that doesn't involve psychological damage and abuse?
Well, let me just clarify a point, because again, this is a very commonly cited talking point that children are being locked away in cages and ripped from their mother's arms, and that's not at all what's going on here. What's going on here is that children at the southern border, when they are brought in with a whole host of other illegal immigrants that have come to this country, children are taken to a separate location where they're not at risk or in danger of being with someone who may potentially be harmful. That's not an immigration policy, mind you. That's a policy in general. If you go to any kind of jail or any kind of detention center, children are separated from the adults for their own safety, at which point they're reunited with their families afterwards. Of course, that's what we've been advocating for this entire evening. I would reject the notion that children are being locked away and having their psychological health degraded. I agree. I mean, ultimately, this entire system exists for their safety. We look at the amount of human trafficking that goes on at the border. If we didn't have those policies, what would become of those children with adults? But without taking the time to actually look at who they're with and look at all parties involved, how can we guarantee their safety?
Is that your response from the Republicans? Okay. And so you want to respond from the Democrats? Okay. Okay. Just give it back.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note that, again, these children are not being immediately reunited with their parents after these proceedings are completed. Like I said, mentioned previously, there's the case of Sonia, who was separated from her father, Dennis, because he had a felony charge of using a false document to enter the country, a nonviolent felony. He was separated. She was held in New York State for 5 months after he had already been deported. So there's not this immediate reunification of families that's happening, as you're claiming.
I feel like we're entering into like a circular line of thinking here, because you keep saying this happened and someone was held in detention for 5 months, and none of us are going to say that's a good thing. We all agree that's a horrible thing. That's something that needs to be fixed. From the very beginning, we've been talking about reforming ICE. We've been talking about increasing funding for ICE to give them the means, the oversight, to make sure these things do not happen again. It's a point that keeps being brought up of something that goes wrong under ICE oversight. Well, we're trying to fix that. And I realize we're into the Q&A part here, but I would venture the question to the college Democrats: how do you seek to fix these problems if you're not willing to give the funding they need to prevent them from happening again? We acknowledge, we agree with you, this is a problem, but we've come to the table with solutions. We've ventured out ideas on how to prevent this from happening again. What do the college Democrats propose?
What I personally would propose is, again, instead of increasing funding to an organization that currently is not able to meet its own guidelines, before I'm entrusting them with more of our taxpayer money, I would expect them to be able to reduce the number of migrants currently in their care for amnesty purposes, who, as I stated before, make their court hearings. They don't need to be in detention. So if we reduce the number of people who are in detention, that already increases the allocation of funds per person. So that's what I would argue policy-wise.
I want to address that because you mentioned that before. It was 97.5, did you say?
No, it's
Then
actually
that
it's
comes back.
98.5.
98.5, okay.
Mhm.
So, but they're also, you say those are the ones that come back for their court dates, but then there's also ones being locked up. Could that maybe have something to do with those that are deemed to be a flea risk, that they're the ones that are kept in detention centers, as is typical of the judicial system?
Let me interject. There is a question on the table here that I want to get the other Democrats here on. Are you in favor of providing more funding for the immigration system as a whole?
Yes, and as I
Yes.
mentioned at the beginning of my speech about Bennett coming up with the bipartisan legislation in 2013 that got shot down by the Republican-controlled House, we thought that policy there was a perfect compromising point to fund ports of entry where most of the drugs and human trafficking actually occur, not over the southern border itself. Funding for such things like a wall, asinine, and just a waste of money. So to say we support funding for enforcement.
We are almost 2 hours into this debate, and that's the first time I've heard the phrase "the wall." So that's good on you. It's good. It's good.
Sorry.
We're gonna jump to another question. Go ahead.
Hi, this is just a general question. Anyone can answer this.
For either side.
Either side.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize for that, but I don't know. So there was like a statistic cited earlier that like ICE has prevented about 500 domestic, well, not domestic, but like terror threats to the United States. But like last year alone, there was 417 mass shootings and also a rise of white domestic terrorism. So would any of you be in support of reallocating funding for basically the inadequacy of the ICE program to Homeland Security to target domestic terrorism, which is a serious threat in the U.S. right now?
Yeah. Yes. As a Democrat, I'll take that side. And first, yes, that is exactly the idea that I share is let's take the funding from ICE, put it back in Homeland Security, and reunify the actual purpose of that to make sure that it aligns with our laws and our morals and ethics here as a nation.
Well, I'll say I don't think it's a one or the other issue, because I think we'll agree that both ICE and both Department of Homeland Security have very important jobs, albeit different jobs, but very important tasks to complete. I'd come back a little bit to what we were talking about before about how much illegal immigrants contribute to the economy and how much they create a deficit. My partner, I believe, gave the statistic 116.5 billion deficit created, and that's from the Foundation of American Immigration Reform, I believe. That by funding ICE, by preventing further illegal immigration to the country, the amount of money that would be put back into the government, that I think right there would cover any kind of additional funding to ICE or Homeland Security, or I don't think it's a one or the other issue as it's being framed.
So there's lots of hands that keep coming up, and we're running short on time, so let's keep the answers shorter if we can. Go ahead.
What's the long-term economic impact?
Wait, we can't hear you. Wait. Let's hear his question, and then we'll work our way back over to the side of the room. Go ahead.
What's the long-term economic impact of like opening citizenship to whoever wants it? This is for both.
The long-term economic impact?
Within like 20 years, what would our economy look like under anybody who wants citizenship getting citizenship?
If we just opened the whole thing up. And also amnesty to those who are here already, just to clarify your question. All right. What would be the economic impact of just opening the whole thing up?
Well, immediately, I don't know what kind of numbers we'd be dealing with who would immediately, and don't
20 years.
say how many people would be entering the country. Exactly. That it's coming under a lot of speculation. So, okay, I'll engage in some speculation here. Let's assume it's several millions of people that suddenly just that are trying to enter the workforce. I agree. There's the so-called lump of labor fallacy where there's supposedly not a finite number of jobs that would open up. However, if you suddenly just overnight introduce millions and millions of people into this country, there's not going to be enough jobs to hold that. Wages are going to be driven down. Unemployment is going to skyrocket. Ultimately, right now, as we're seeing, this deficit is created from the use of public services, welfare, without any tax revenue being redirected into it. I think immediately, short term, I don't think we'd get to, you said 20 years? Yes. Was it? I don't even think we'd get to 20 years at that point, if in such a short span of introducing that many people into the country.
And to kind of build off that point, if we're looking at this very, omnisciently, is if we went, like, let's say that's a Democratic policy, right? And then we also enact all these other policies that they're looking at enacting, such as universal basic income, free public education,
All right, wait, no,
a single payer system.
we're getting off track.
Well, no,
here.
what I'm saying is that the estimated cost of that for the current American citizenry is $36 trillion on conservative numbers. $36 trillion. Imagine how much of an economic deficit that would cause if you had another 7 million people entering the country and getting citizenship every year, plus all those benefits provided by the government.
We can debate the basic income next term. Okay, do you want to respond to this quickly, the Democrats?
I mean, the idea of just suddenly just getting rid of all of our immigration policies in one fell swoop is kind of hard. It's all like Gus said, it's all based on speculation, and because I don't have any statistics of that with me, I would prefer not to engage in any speculation when it comes to this. Obviously, we need obviously the idea of just letting anyone who wants to come in would create a very short-term economic spiral, but long-term, I could not tell you. I'm sorry.
All right, I got to let the timekeeper ask a question, so she's next here. And then we'll get the person behind her,
Thank
too, with the
you.
next microphone. Oh, someone's already got the microphone? What's that? All right, okay, all right. Go ahead then. But my timekeeper goes first, and then you go. Go ahead.
So my question is about the voter ID law, and my whole thing is that, there's been a lot of talk about racism and everything with that, but other than that, that policy is ableist, because people who are disabled, a large part of the disabled community, which is the biggest minority group that is in this country, cannot go and get a state-issued ID because first off, they don't drive, a lot of them. Second off, they sometimes can't even sit in the DMV long enough to wait for a government-issued ID. So my question is, also, then with voter ID laws, you can't even have an absentee ballot without having your state ID. So how are you going to respond to that when people who are a large part of this country want to vote?
Well, just to answer the last point, I know a great deal of absentee balloting. Right now, a lot of especially government systems are shifting to online. I know my absentee ballot for the last election in Connecticut, I had to file a lot of that online. Hopefully it wouldn't be handled like the Iowa caucus handled, online, but fingers crossed. In terms of people with disabilities obtaining voter ID, I'm not quite certain as to the validity of that. We do have laws in place that effectively mandate that those with disabilities be granted effectively an easy path to obtain these kinds of voter IDs. That I'm not certain as to the validity of that. If there is a problem with people with disabilities obtaining voter ID, there's no reason why we can't amend the law to make it easier for them, so long as they are legal citizens. And you can point out any problem. Okay, let me say this.
No, I'm gonna stop because we do want to get more questions in.
Sure.
We have very limited time left. Go ahead, sir.
All right, I will add my question in very quickly. As the proud son of an African immigrant from Mali who was broken by this country for many years working on trucks that delivered packages to Amazon and all bunch of other things, how do you propose, by expanding our immigration system, allowing more people in, how are you going to protect these people from the predatory and shark-like industries that take advantage of them, and the fact of the matter that they are waiting to get their statuses in? Because although I understand that letting in as many people as possible is the American dream, the fact of the reality is our bureaucracy is unfortunately slow in dealing with these things and responding to these issues. So how will both either the Democrats or the Republicans fix this issue and protect people from the predators that wish to take advantage of them?
So, yes, to your point about the predators taking advantage of those who are coming and using their labor as almost, in essence, as an indentured servant. We obviously do not support that as a Democratic Party whatsoever. We actually promote the unification and the creation of unions and union membership. So what we would essentially, if all things were to work out correctly, is with those immigrants coming in looking for labor or looking for work, we would help appoint them or point them in the way towards a union so that they can come together, use the bargaining power that they have, that can be exacerbated and given to them through a union, and actually fight for their rights and for their privileges that they so rightly deserve. But without unions and with right-to-work states and legislation that undermines workers' rights, you're going to continue to have that problem exist. And I'm sorry, but I noticed you're sitting on the Republican side, and that the degradation of union membership in this country is because of Republican legislation for promotion of right-to-work states that
All right, I want to give the Republicans a chance to jump in, and then we need to take more questions. Do you have anything you want to add to that gentleman's question?
Yeah, are you predicating your policy on that you grant citizenship to everyone that comes into the country?
No, that's not what I said.
So no, I'm saying, so is it simply citizenship? Like, what qualifications do you have to have to join the union?
The union to work, you have to be a worker for that company. I mean,
Do you have to hold a visa, a green card, citizenship?
All right, but the Republican, do you have a direct response, though, to that gentleman's question? Otherwise, I want to move on. Do you have No? Okay,
No,
all right. We'll get I originally called on you, and then we took a detour, so we'll get you now. Thanks.
Hi, okay. So my question is directed to the college Republicans, particularly towards, but not limited to, those who argued during the ICE section, because you referenced the Morton Memorandum excessively, and I'm going to safely assume that you are in agreement with most of what's said. Given the undeniable and overwhelming trend of abuse of power given to several law enforcement agencies from prosecutorial discretion, can you convince me on why reform and even oversight of an organization that doesn't even allow or require its employees to know Spanish, only emphasizes, would be more effective? And notice how I say effective and not more efficient than the inception of a new one with vetted employees with better or more qualified employees, I'll say.
Do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
So that's one of the problems that we've been seeing that happened with the recent hiring spree, which is exactly why we want stricter training and vetting procedures. We recognize the inefficiencies. The problem is that if you were to say that ICE agents are inefficient, we should get rid of all of them, there is no alternative solution. The alternative solution is to train them better, to make sure that they have the qualifications that you're seeking. And in order to do so, we have to give more money to ICE to ensure that they can actually train their agents effectively. I mean, we argue that it has been effective. As we stated multiple times, it's decreased crime rates overall. Not only that, but again, there is no solution in place. The idea of abolishing an entire governmental agency and then reestablishing it is realistically not possible. Not only is it not possible, it would take an exuberant amount of money and time. And there's no guarantee that that agency will be more efficient. I mean, there's really no solid guarantee that a new agency will be that will be more efficient. Instead, we can offer more efficacy by training ICE agents properly.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and in the interest of at least partial balance in the questions, I would like to say, is there a question for the Democrats here that someone wants to ask? Here we go, right there, 2 hands up. I thought, I was looking at, I saw 2 hands up with you. Did you have a question? Oh, you put your hands up. Oh, okay. All right, go ahead. You have the last question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for the College Democrats, you stated, this just goes back to your opening, you stated that the College Republicans standing on stage can either be in compliance with the so-called, and you put it, racist, bigoted policies that the Trump administration is promoting, or they can agree. So are you implying that any conservative or anyone in general who agrees with the policies of the Trump administration is a racist and a bigot?
Yes.
It sounds...
I mean, 100% yes. There is no doubt in my mind. To this point, 3 years into the term, if you're looking at his immigration policies and actual language that he's used towards immigrants and towards his policies, there's no doubt in my mind that those who still support him up to this day are either racist or just literally have not watched the news.
And members of the jury, this is the decay of Western public forums. Is that
Says
literally
the guy
whenever
whose party just supported a interference in our election. I mean, come on.
And was
All
acquitted
right,
of the accusation.
we're gonna stop it there. The first hour and 59 minutes were great. Let me just thank the debaters all again, and thank you for your questions, and we'll talk outside.